And ladies and gentlemen, we're back. So sorry I have some technical difficulties. This is my first run. I have just terrible Wi-Fi in my garage, and it is the best place to film things. So we're really just hoping that we could do it there. But we're here. We're making it happen. We're back into it. So I'm going to go back just a hot second. We're all caught up. 2 Samuel 7, 8 through 16. And we're looking at the context of this Davidic covenant, and that is David. David is the first thing we're looking at. David, a man after God's own heart. And we looked in 1 Samuel 13 and 14, Samuel 16, 7. This idea showed a man after God's own heart. This is David, this one who lived for God and fought for him. And we were looking at that in the story of David and Goliath, which we're going to look at again right here. Samuel 17:4 reads this. And this is talking about the Israelites on one side, the Philistines on the other. And instead of fighting against each other, they send out a champion. And here's the champion of the Philistines. And then a champion came out from the armies of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was clothed with scale armor, which weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze. He also had bronze greaves on his legs and a bronze javelin slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the head of his spear weighed 600 shekels of iron. His shield carrier also walked before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel and said to them, "Why do you come out to draw up in battle array? Am I not the Philistine, and you servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me." This is the enemy against them. This is the Philistine who's going to go against the people of Israel. And Saul's choice here, what Saul is supposed to do, understanding Israel's history, understanding who is in control, is to go down, realize God will give him the strength and defeat the Philistines. He should know that if he goes down, prays to the Lord will give him strength and he can defeat Goliath. But Saul does not do this because Saul is not a man after God's own heart. Rather, David, a little measly shepherd boy, walks up and says, "I'll do it. I'll do it." And what's fascinating here is there's this fascinating imagery of where Saul gives David his armor. And so now here's David wearing the armor of Saul, the armor that Saul should have worn into battle to defeat the Philistine, Goliath. But rather now David is wearing it. And even more fascinating is David takes it off and says, "No, I'm not going to fight for you, Saul. I'm not going to fight for the people of Israel. I'm going to fight for God." And as a man after God's own heart, he goes out, not the armor of Saul, but the armor of God upon him. Not literal armor, but this manifest spiritual armor that he knows he has, that he can trust in the Lord to go out and take down Goliath. And in verse 41, it reads, "Then the Philistine came on and approached David with the shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy with a handsome appearance. The Philistine said to David, 'Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?' And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine also said to David, 'Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field.' Then David said to the Philistine, 'You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of Yahweh of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. This day Yahweh will deliver you up into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you, and I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that Yahweh does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is Yahweh's, and he will give you into our hands." And then here's just some added description, which I think David just to just. Then it happened, the Philistine rose and came and drew near to meet David. That David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet the Philistine, and David put his hand in his bag and a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead, and the stone sank into his forehead so that he fell on his face to the ground. And here's what I was talking about. I love this. Thus David prevailed over this Philistine, sling a stone, and he struck the Philistine, killed him, but there was no sword in David's hand. And then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. Now that's just awesome. That is a man after God's own heart who destroyed the Philistine, who shows that God is the God of Israel. So keep that in your back pocket as we go into the Davidic covenant. David, the king of Israel, is a good king. Israel is in a good condition, and it has a king who is the man after God's own heart. The second piece of context that we have to look at is we're going to have to go back a little bit farther and look at the covenants. The covenants that come before 3. We're not going to actually turn there. We're just going to quickly go over them. The first we have is the Noahic covenant. The Noahic covenant. If we go all the way back to the flood, massive flood comes and destroys the earth. And afterwards, the Lord says to Noah, I will not destroy the earth with a flood again. And we can understand that in the future, we know because of Revelations and other texts that the world will then be destroyed with fire. But at this point, that's not the point that's being made. It's not saying, oh, but there will be destruction of fire. Rather, it's saying that the world is reset for a redemption story. The world is being reset for a redemption story. This idea that there won't be another flood to reset the world. Rather, from that moment after the flood to the coming of Christ, that is the redemption story. And then the Christ forward to the final second coming where the world is destroyed with fire. That session right there, there is a promise that that is the world set for redemption. And the Noahic covenant sets the direction for world history and shows what's going to come. Christ is to come. The next one we have is the Abrahamic covenant. We know the Abrahamic covenant well. I bet you've heard it before, where it promises 3 things. It promises land to Abraham, it promises a seed that will come after him, and it promises blessings that will go to the entire world. Land is the land of Israel. The seed is Jesus Christ who will come to save Israel. And the blessing is the blessing that will go to all who believe in him and are saved. That anyone, Gentiles and Israelites alike, can come and believe in Jesus and be part of Israel and be saved through that. So the Abrahamic covenant sets how this restoration is going to work. Noahic covenant says it's coming. Abrahamic covenant sets the details of how it's going to play out. And then thirdly, we have the Mosaic covenant. Mosaic covenant's a little different. It's a little wonky. So Moses goes up to Mount Sinai to go talk with the Lord. And the Lord gives him the laws of these are all the things you're going to do. The most prominent of them being the 10 commandments. So he takes these 10 commandments and he comes down from the mountain. And this is that covenant that was made on that mountain. So what is that covenant? And in essence, it is the things that we must do for redemption. We must complete all of these rules, all of these laws for redemption. But we know, and Moses is about to realize possible. These are all the things that we can do. That we can't do. These are all the things, the laws that are in Leviticus, in Deuteronomy, that are shown on the tablet, are all the things we can't do. The proof that we need redemption. See, Moses' covenant is about that proof that we need a Christ. We need someone to come and save us. And when he comes down, what does he see? He sees the Israelites worshiping the golden calf, and he takes the tablets and he smashes them because he realizes we can't do this. There's no way that we can perfect all of these laws. And it's the realization that there is a need for Jesus. There is a need for redemption. So the Noahic covenant sets the world for a redemption story. The Abrahamic covenant says this is who it's going to be. And then the Mosaic covenant shows how much we need him. Let's all connect. Here's our context. Our 2 contexts we got to focus on is David, a man after God's own heart, and the covenants that he knows and that are shown through the Old Testament. So next we're going to look at the canvas of 2 Samuel 7. 2 Samuel 7, the canvas. So let's go over there and turn to it. 2 Samuel 7, 9 through 11. We're going to start there. I'm just going to read that. And 8 through 11. Now therefore, thus you shall say to my servant David, thus says, yes, I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep, that you should be prince over my people Israel. Basically saying to David, hey, David, I have taken you. I have seen that you are a man after God's own heart, and I have brought you into Israel so that you could be a king over the people of Israel. And I have been with you wherever you went and have cut off all your enemies before you. And this is referencing the beginning of 2 Samuel 7, which I talked about during when we had technical difficulties. You may have not heard it, but basically Israel was going very well, and God is realizing this and saying, I have cared for you. And then it says this. I find this just fascinating. And I will make a great name like the name of the great ones of the earth, and I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them, so that they may dwell in their own place and be disturbed no more. What does that sound like to you? To me, it sounds like the Abrahamic covenant. See, the Abrahamic covenant is in covenant. See, what we're going to look at right now in these couple verses is how these three covenants are in the Davidic covenant. The covenants that come before are in the Davidic covenant. Abner Chao, I listened to a sermon on him, said it very well, that this is the one covenant to rule them all. And here he's making this Lord of the Rings side comment, but that's another story for another day. It's important to understand how powerful and awesome this Davidic covenant is. That this is the one covenant to rule them all, because here it mentions the Abrahamic covenant. Like the name, the great ones of the earth, talking about the name that will be given to Abraham, and a place for Israel. It says that, and it talks about how he will care for them, and I will appoint a place for my people Israel and plant them so they may dwell in their own place. And then it keeps going, and it says here, talking about the Noahic covenant. Where is that? And I will appoint a place for my people Israel and will plant them so that they may dwell in their own place and be disturbed no more. And then moving forward in 11, it says, from the time they appoint, halfway through 11, and it will give you rest from all of your enemies. Now, rest, this same word is the same word for Noah. It also connects to what the Noahic law is all about. There will be rest from judgment. There will be rest from your enemies. And it's interesting and important to note that why is he saying rest from your enemies if he already has rest from his enemies? And the point is to say that there will be this eternal rest from his enemies, which is promised in the Noahic covenant. Rest from judgment that will come in the future, past the revelations, past the second coming, into eternity. Noahic covenant is mentioned, Abrahamic covenant is mentioned, and I skipped in verse 10, and I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and plant them, so Abrahamic covenant, so they may dwell in your own place and be disturbed no more. And violent men shall afflict them no more as formerly. Once again, this is eventually. Oh, we're back. And violent men shall afflict them no more as formerly. And then hear this. From the time that I appointed judges over my people Israel. So what were the violent men for? What were the judges for? They were for a rebellious, sinful Israel. And this comes to the point and the idea of Mosaic covenant. For the Mosaic covenant says that there must be judgment. There must be all of this darkness and hardship from the Lord because of a sinful Israel. But the Mosaic covenant also promises that Christ will come to save you from that need of continual judgment and violent people that the Lord sends upon his Israel. And so here we see this triple covenants all shown in the Davidic covenant. The Davidic covenant, as Abner Chao says, is the one covenant to rule them all. Moving forward, 2 Samuel 7, 9 through 11 shows that all the covenants are fulfilled. And I tell you that as David's hearing this, he's smart. He's read the Old Testament. He's a man after God's own heart. He's probably getting pretty excited because he just read all three of these covenants are going to come true. This is crazy. But when he reads 2 Samuel 7:12, when he hears that from Nathan, the prophet, from God, he probably goes crazy with excitement and glory and gratitude. Hear this. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will rise up your offspring after you. The Davidic covenant shows that the three covenants that come before will come through David. What an incredible blessing that comes to David, where he is told right then and there that his offspring will be the perfecters of these three covenants. And I bet that David has this fear in the back of his mind as he's a king, as he comes to the end of his life, worrying if the kingdom that he has created, the kingdom that he has been able to keep alive, politically stable, free from enemies, if it's going to be destroyed, if there's going to be hardship. But here God says, no, there will be an eternal kingdom that will come, that will be of your offspring, that will fulfill these covenants, and that will have not as great a kingdom as the one that David had, but much greater. So here we see that all the covenants are fulfilled, and all the covenants are fulfilled in David's offspring. Moving forward, we see that all the covenants are fulfilled in one person. 2 Samuel 7:13-16, which we're about to go into, said that there will be one person who will fulfill all these covenants, and he will be an offspring of David. So before we go into who that may be, we have to see what are the qualifications. What are the qualifications of this person? What type of person do they have to be? And let's begin. 2 Samuel 7:13. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. One person will be the eternal king of this kingdom. Who is it? This is the first requirement. I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. The first requirement is that this king must be a son of God. And now it is important to understand that as we look through the whole Bible, we understand son of God has two meanings. The meaning that is obviously implicated here is son of God as in literal son of God, Jesus being the son of God. But I think it's also important to understand, and we'll get to why in a moment, that son of God can also mean son of God adopted into the kingdom. For David is not literally the son of God, but he has been adopted in a sense that he is a son of God. He is saved. He is a man after God's own heart. He is a son of God. So we read the first one and we go, okay, David could possibly be this king. It is possible. It could be David's son. It could be the ones after him. It is possible after this first one. Now, it's not, as we'll see in just a moment, for the second qualification. Son of God, and then here is the second one. When he commits iniquity, I will discipline him with the rod of men, with the stripes of the sons of men. Our second qualification is that if they sin, if there is iniquity, they will be judged, and they will not be the king of this eternal kingdom. And there David is cut out. Immediately, David is cut out. Because I said, man after God's own heart, great kingdom, all these great things. But there's one, there's many sins, but there's one that just comes to my mind and makes me go, no, it can't be David. And that's the story of Bathsheba, where he goes and he commits adultery and he commits murder. Yes, he repents. And yes, he is forgiven. And yes, he is still a son of God adopted into that sonship. But he is not holy. He is not a holy king, not at all. He is full of sin. He is a sinner. He is a fallen person, and he is judged by God, not with the eternal judgment for he is saved, but with temporal judgment that comes to any believer, that when you commit a sin, there is judgment, and that is why he loses his first son from Bathsheba. And so it's important to understand that David does not fulfill this requirement. So who will it be? A son of God who is eternally holy, who has absolutely no iniquity. And the third one, verse 15, but my steadfast love will not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, who I put away from before you. The third requirement is that they are loved by God. Now, once again, David was loved by God, but he was not loved to the extent that is presented here. And Saul was not, absolutely not. And that example is given this idea of that the spirit was taken away from Saul. It was given to David so that he would be the king, and the love was put upon him. But we understand, and we're going to look more into this as we go farther in this verses, is that the one who really is loved by God is Jesus. And that in this loving relationship from eternity past, the triune relationship between Father and Son and love reflected in the Holy Spirit, there is this eternal Son and Father relationship manifested with incredible love. This is the king to come. Loved by God, Son of God, holy. And then here is the last one, which furthers this claim that it is not David, and it is definitely not some human king that's to come after. And your house and your kingdom shall be made forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. And from that we see that it will be an eternal king. It will be a king who will last forever. See, this is written at the end of 2 Samuel. Well, not at the very end, but I do believe David has gotten to a stance where he realizes, I mean, he's a king of war. He knows what death is. He knows he will die. I mean, we read it earlier where it says, when you lie down with your fathers, when you die, death is a reality for David. But for this king, it will not be a reality. For this king will defeat death. And that is our final one, that this will be a king who will eternally rule this kingdom. So there are 4 requirements: Son of God, holy, loved by God, and eternal king. These are our 4 requirements, and I've already hinted many, many times at who this king is. It's Jesus Christ. It's the one who's going to come. It is the one who is prophesied. But I don't know if David knows that fully yet. I bet when he reads this and he really thinks about it, he realizes that it will be something like this, that he has that spirit to realize that. But immediately hearing this, I'm still wondering a little bit, just first reading it. And I think we need to go in deeper to understand who could it be? Who could it be? And to look at more details, really see that it is Jesus Christ and really get into the glory of what it means that the Davidic covenant prophesies Jesus. So we've looked at the context. We've looked at the canvas, how it takes that context to make this strong point of all the covenants are fulfilled. All of them are fulfilled in David, and all of them are filled in one person, this eternal, holy, loved by God, Son of God, to come that will rule in kingship. But who is he exactly? Who is being prophesied by the Davidic covenant? And I'll say before I go into this, even though I've said a lot about it, is that this is a contested question of who is being prophesied. There's different things that say different things, but I think we can figure this out. So, the first thing that is prophesied in the Davidic covenant is protection for Israel. And I read that many times, but I'll just read it one more time. And I will appoint a place for my people Israel and plant them, so they may dwell in their own place and be disturbed no more. And violent men shall afflict them no more as formerly. Protection for Israel. This is prophesied for the people of Israel. So who is going to bring this? The kingdom of David that lasts 400 years after this. It seems like an eternity in a sense. But what happens at the end of that seeming eternity? Let's turn for a moment to 2 Kings 25. 2 Kings 24 and 2 Kings 25. This comes at the end of Kings, after many, many kings are cataloged from Solomon all the way to the last king of Judah. And 2 Kings 24 reads this: In his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim, who was the king of Israel, became his servant for 3 years. And this begins the end of Judah and the end of David's line of being in kingship. And as we read on through 2 Kings 24 and 2 Kings 25, we see the end of Israel. Now, in the 9th year of his reign, this is in chapter 25, on the 10th day of the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came, he and all his armies, against Jerusalem, camped against it, and built a siege well all around it. So the city was under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. And it goes on to say that the city was broken into, and all the men of war fled by night by way of the gate. But the army of the Chaldeans pursued the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho, and all his armies were scattered from him. And they captured the king and brought him to the king of Babylon in Riblah, and he passed sentence on him. They slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, then put out the eyes of Zedekiah and bound him with bronze fetters and brought him to Babylon. The kingdom of David here falls. 100%, the kingdom of David is not foretold. So who is foretold? Christ and the eternal kingdom. Now, there are many, many speakings of this eternal kingdom in Revelations and also in the New Testament from Jesus' mouth. But I personally want to look at the Old Testament and get an Old Testament prophecy to qualify this prophecy. So we're going to turn to Jeremiah 33. And what's fascinating about Jeremiah and why it fits so well is Jeremiah is written before and during the destruction of Israel by Babylon. And so it fits right in. Jeremiah 33, 4 through 9. Let's turn there. Jeremiah 33, 4 through 9 reads this. For thus says the Lord God of Israel concerning the houses of this city and concerning the houses of the kings of Judah. Hear this. Sounds familiar, which are broken down to make a defense against the siege ramps and against the sword, while they are coming to fight with the Chaldeans and to fill them with the corpses of men whom I have slain in my anger, speaking of the Lord's anger against the sinful Israel. And in my wrath, and I have hidden my face from the city because of all of their wickedness. And then hear this. Behold, I will bring to it health and healing, and I will heal them, and I will reveal to them an abundance of peace and truth. I will restore the fortunes of Judah and the fortunes of Israel, and will rebuild them as they were at first. I will cleanse them from all their iniquity by which they have sinned against me, and I will pardon all their iniquities by which they have sinned against me, and by which they have transgressed against me. It will be to me a name of joy, praise, and glory before all the nations of the earth, which will hear of all the good that I do for them, and they will fear and tremble because of all the good and all the peace that I make for it. Here is prophesied the reconciliation of Israel. Now, it is important to understand that this protection of Israel, this eternal kingdom that Christ is going to do, through the power of God and the Father and the Holy Spirit together caring for Israel, is not just to the quote-unquote genetic Israel. If we remember from Romans that we were looking through a couple months ago, we remember that there are parts of Israel that do not believe and are cut out, and there are believing Gentiles that are brought in. So this Israel is in essence all who believe and are part of the Abrahamic covenant through belief, not genetically. So this goes to all. This protection that is prophesied in the eternal kingdom goes to all. The next thing that is prophesied in 2 Samuel 7 is this house of the Lord. This house of the Lord is mentioned multiple times. He says here, I will appoint a place for my people Israel, in verse 11, at the end of verse 11. Moreover, Yahweh declares to you that Yahweh will make you a house. And the end, it says it again in verse 16. And your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. So what is this house? So let's turn to Solomon, because Solomon builds the temple of the Lord. In essence, the house. 1 Kings 8:13 reads this. 1 Kings 8:13. After the creation of the temple, it reads, I have surely built you a lofty house, a place for your dwelling forever. And I think Solomon here is addressing the Davidic covenant, for he thinks at this moment that this temple will be where the Lord will live forever. And Solomon has done a good thing, but what he does not realize is that is not true. This is not the dwelling place of the Lord forever. Because let's remember what happens in 2 Kings 25. What happens to this temporary house of the Lord? 2 Kings 25, verse 8. Now on the 7th day of the 5th month, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar. Quick stop there. Isn't it awesome that it gives all those details of time? I mean, it shows that this is true. This is history that the Bible is stating. History inspired by God to show God's greatness. King of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He burned the house of Yahweh, the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Even every great house he burned with fire. So all the army of the Chaldeans who were with the captain of the guard broke down the walls around Jerusalem, and they destroy the house of the Lord. And it goes on and gives detail about how the house of the Lord is destroyed by the Babylonians. This house that Solomon makes, which is a good thing, is not a lasting thing. So what is prophesied here? Because it says an eternal house, it says an eternal kingdom. And this is where Christ is brought up again. And once again, I'm going to look to an Old Testament prophecy. Let's turn to the book of Zechariah real quick. Zechariah 6, 12 through 15. Zechariah 6, 12 through 15. Thus says Yahweh of hosts, behold a man, and this is talking about Jesus, whose name is Branch, for he will branch out from where he is, and he will build the temple of Yahweh. Yes, it is he who will build the temple of Yahweh, and he who will bear the honor and sit and rule on his throne. Thus he will be a priest on his throne, and the council of peace will be between the two offices. Now the crown will become a reminder in the temple of the Yahweh to Helam, Tabijah, Jedai, and Hen, the son of Zephaniah. Those who are far off will come and build the temple of Yahweh. Then you will know that the Yahweh of hosts has sent me to you, and so on and so forth. And in essence, this is prophesying the house to come, which is the church. Because Christ is going to create the church in the New Testament, which then lasts into eternity. This house, this bride of Christ that will last forever. This is the house of the Lord, where God dwells not in a literal house, but in the house of the hearts of those who believe in Christ and who have been saved by him, and who in eternity come will be the bride of Christ in eternal union. This is the house to come that is prophesied in the Davidic covenant to David and that goes forward. What a beautiful thing that is. And the last thing that is mentioned is this love of God and this Son of God that is mentioned. This is not a literal thing that's prophesied, but this wondering of who is this Son of God, this love of God that David may still be wondering. We have read the New Testament, so we know, but who is it? And for a moment, we can think maybe it's Solomon. Maybe it's the son of David, but we understand that Solomon did have peace with God. He was saved. We can look at his writings and say that that is true, but he definitely was not the actual literal son of God. He did not have that full love of God. Rather, it was Christ. It is Christ foretold, the one and only true Son of God, who is being prophesied here, who will be the one and only ruler, the one and only king over this eternal kingdom that, as we mentioned, is characterized by being a Son of God, holy, full of the love of God, and an eternal king. And we can see this in Isaiah 9, 6 through 7, where it says, a child will be born. Let me actually turn there real quick to make sure that I can, because I don't have this memorized. Give me half a second. Turning over to Isaiah 9, 6 through 7. Isaiah 9, 6 through 7 reads this. For a child will be born to us, a son will be given to us, and the government will rest on his shoulders, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, and here it is, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. The child born. As we go into Christmas, isn't this cool that we're reading this? I mean, this is the Christmas one that we always read in Isaiah, is that Jesus is the Son of God. He is the fulfiller of the Davidic covenant. He is the one who's going to bring protection to Israel, who's going to bring the house of the Lord, who will experience the full love of God as the Son of God, and who, as I mentioned earlier, will come and die on the cross so that others can be saved and also be sons of a God through adoption. And the last thing that is in 2 Samuel 7, which is so important to understand, is one thing that fully distinguishes David's line from Christ, who is in David's line, but is not human fully, for he is Son of God and Son of man. My apologies, both are full. What I'm trying to say here is that David's line, they are not Son of God, but Jesus is. So if we turn back to 2 Samuel 7, I find that last passage in verse 14 so fascinating because it contrasts everything else. Everything else sounds so good, but that when he commits iniquity, I will discipline him with the rod of men, with the stripes of the sons of men. Why is that added? Why is this dark tone added? And the point here is to make this contrast, to make it very, very obviously clear how much we need a perfect, holy king. And that's why it's important to look at the story of Solomon. And that's why, as I'll go in and tell you guys right now, we're going to be looking at the story of Solomon. And I think Solomon is the story of Solomon, which we're going to be going through moving forward. 1 Kings 1 through 11, the story of Solomon is such a great reflection of the Davidic covenant. I use those words carefully because Solomon is a foreshadowing of who will truly fulfill the Davidic covenant. Because let's read this again, focusing on that, what I just read there, 14. We're going to read all of 2 Samuel 7, 9 through 2 Samuel 7, 8 through 16, one more time, taking the story of Solomon into consideration, and it will fully make sense when we really dig into 1 Kings 1 through 11. I've been studying Solomon for the last 2 years, slowly, so not that in depth, and I really think it's just a great character to study, not because Solomon is great, but to understand how frail we are and how in need of an eternal, holy king who is truly Son of God, truly holy, truly righteous, and the eternal king. So let's read this. And it's a story in a sense. It's not just a prophecy, it's a story. Now therefore, thus you shall say to my servant David, thus says the Lord of hosts, I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep, that you should be prince over my people Israel, not king, for God is king. So David is brought as the king so that he can start this kingship line. And I have been with you wherever you went, and I have cut off all your enemies from before you. And I will make for you a great name, like the name of the great ones of the earth. And I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them so that they may dwell in their own place and be disturbed no more. How much is this a reflection of what is to come in Solomon? When Solomon comes, he is an even greater king than David was in realms of political power, economic power, wealth of the kingdom, and the largest stretch of Israel that Israel has ever had. This is Israel under Solomon. I'm not saying Solomon was a better king. I'm saying the kingdom of Israel was better. 100% almighty kingdom. Or at least it looked like that. And violent men shall afflict them no more. There were no wars that hurt Israel. There was always victories. From the time that I appointed judges of my people Israel, and it will give you rest from all your enemies. Once again, Solomon has rest from his enemies. Moreover, Yahweh declares to you that Yahweh will make you a house. Solomon makes a house for the Lord. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, when David dies, I will raise up your offspring after you, Solomon, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. It is so true, as I said. Solomon's kingdom is so politically wealthy, economically powerful. All of these things, he has it all. He shall build a house for my Sam, as I said it again. He does build the temple, and he does it justly, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom. And here's a shift. Forever. Huh? That can't be Solomon. I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. And then hear this. When he commits iniquity, I will discipline him with the rod of men, with the stripes of the sons of men. This is here to make the point. And I think we're going to fully get into this point when we get to Solomon more deeply, 1 Kings 1 through 11. And the point is this, is that yes, Solomon created an epic kingdom. But what happens at the end of Solomon's life? Spoiler alert, but it doesn't go well. He has a total of 1,000 women who rule his life, who lead him to worship other gods, turn his eye from God, who he used to follow, who he used to obey. And what does God do? He judges him. The kingdom is destroyed. The kingdom is split in half. And Kings does not go well after that. There is destruction. There are armies who come and destroy Israel. There are wicked kings. Baal is brought back. The golden calf is even brought back. It goes terribly because there is judgment when iniquity is committed. And that is Solomon. That is Solomon. He, in essence, does somehow connect to the Davidic covenant, but something's off. And the reason being is that he is son of man, but not son of God. But there's hope, because this prophecy does not end. This beautiful story that is shown in the Davidic covenant does not end. But my steadfast love will not depart from him. At the end of Solomon's life, which you can see in Ecclesiastes, is that he comes back to God and he repents. I do believe it's not clearly mentioned in the Bible, but if you study Ecclesiastes, he says at the end of Ecclesiastes, the chief end of man is not women, it's not my own passions, it's to live for God, to obey and worship him. The love of God comes back to Solomon. But the love of God comes back to Solomon in another way. The love of God comes back to David in another way. And it's this, that the love of God will come through Christ to the people of Israel in the future. Read on. But my steadfast love will not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away from before you. And here it is, and your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. This is Jesus to come. Yes, man will commit iniquity. Yes, Solomon will fail. Yes, he will be redeemed by who? By the eternal king who will lead an eternal kingdom that will be forever, that a throne that shall be established forever. This is Jesus to come. So as we look at 2 Samuel 7, 8 through 16, I think the best way to look at it is to understand the context of the covenants that have come before, how David fulfills all of those in this beautiful canvas of him fulfilling all of these covenants through his lineage that will come after him. And his realization that it is not him, it is not his son. It is a son of God who will come, who will be holy, loved by God, and an eternal king who will come. To understand the contrast between someone who is the Son of Man, Solomon, and someone who is both Son of Man and Son of God, Jesus to come. And more than that, I think it's important to look at this covenant and see it as a story, a foreshadowing of the story of Solomon, and how Solomon's story does not fulfill the Davidic covenant, not in any way, but rather shows what needs to come, the need for Jesus. And that's why I love the Old Testament. We had been going through the Old Testament at 180, and I just love the Old Testament because Jesus is so obvious. And after studying the New Testament and seeing Jesus coming, it's just awesome to see what comes before, what foreshadows, what shows Jesus to come. And lastly, I want to read one verse from Revelations 5. We're going to turn to Revelations 5 for just a hot second. And I know I said I wasn't going to use any New Testament verses, but I'm breaking my rule because this verse just brings it all together to remind us who is the fulfiller of the Davidic covenant, the covenant that Solomon failed to fulfill. Revelations 5 speaks of this scroll. And it reads this in 5:1. I saw on the right hand of him who sat on the throne a book written inside and on the back, sealed up with 7 seals. So why all of that detail is given is to show that this seal is a covenant. This seal is a covenant. And then we move to verse 8, and it reads, when he had taken the book, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each one holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And they sang a new song, saying, worthy are you to take and break its seals, for you were slain and purchased for God with your blood men from every tribe and tongue and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests to our God, and they will reign upon the earth. Moving forward, worthy is the Lamb that was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing. This is the Christ to come. This is the Christ prophesied by the Davidic covenant. And I hope that you guys will follow me as we go through 1 Kings 1 through 11, starting next week, looking at Solomon, the foreshadowing of Christ, and the awesome reality, yet stark and terrifying reality of this need for Christ, fallen man in need of Christ. And that's where we're going to end it today. I hope to see you guys next time for 1 Kings 1 through 11. And I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties. We'll fix them next time. All right, we'll end it there. I'll see you next week.